So welcome in, everyone. I decided I would do things a little bit differently today. So rather than asking everyone to check in with a poll question, with where do your feet land question or something like that, I thought it would be nice to do a little bit of a poll. Since we're doing this topic of authenticity and really unpacking authenticity, I thought I'd ask this question, and it's a totally anonymous poll. If you choose to participate, your name won't show up or anything like that. And so I'm going to ask SJ to just post this poll question for us and invite you to answer, how authentic are you feeling today? And this is going to make a lot of sense. When you see the options, it's going to make a lot of sense as we begin to unpack the topic, and Geraldine and I start to get into this whole concept of authenticity. But just a little bit of a check-in there. How authentic are you feeling today? So yeah, so I think we've got all our answers. So are you able to share the results?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
we've got 38% at 90 or more, 31% at 80 to 90, 23% at 70 to 80, and 8% at 50 to 60.
So isn't that kind of interesting? I think that, when we kind of put this into this perspective of percentile or degrees, like maybe it's fair to say that we're not 100% feeling authentic all the time. And if that happens, is that okay? I don't know. We're going to question that a little bit. So welcome into Mindful Lunch, everyone. My name is Pat Lee. For those of you who I haven't met just yet, and I'm the lead facilitator and founder of REU. And if you are new to REU, just a little bit of a background, like this is a company that helps individuals and groups build meaningful connections that support mental well-being and strengthen community capacity and resilience. And one of the ways that we try to do that is through Mindful Lunch, which is a deliberate act of interrupting the busyness of our workday. And it's a new way to try to be productive, to find ourselves settling into some learning and conversations that ultimately help us show up better and be more productive for ourselves and resilient in all aspects of our personal and professional life. So I'm really, really super happy to welcome in all of you this afternoon. And for those who'll be watching on the recording outside of this, oh, you're most welcome, Allison. Thank you. For everyone that's so for persons who are here live and for persons who are going to be watching on the recording, I just want to give a shout out to my colleague who assists with all the technical aspects of things, and that's SJ. That does all the technical background work for me on this really intricate Zoom call. Thank you for being here, SJ. And to my special guest, just a really quick hello to her before we get into things, which is Geraldine De Braune. Really super awesome lady that I just love, 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 love her. So I invite you to just take a moment, if you can, to just find yourself settling into a space where you can make room for the conversation and the learning that's about to happen. And I typically do this. It's completely optional. You are free to choose not to engage with this, what I call an arrival practice, which is just settling into silence. And that settling into silence is just giving ourselves some space to disconnect from what we were doing and find ourselves in what we're about to do. And we'll do this with a simple practice called box breathing. If you're familiar with box breathing, or if you're unfamiliar with box breathing, all that it is you take an in breath for about 4 seconds. If you can manage 4, whatever you can manage, it's up to you, but you inhale for 4 seconds. You try to hold the count of the breath for 4 seconds. Then you exhale for 4, hold at the end of the exhale for 4, and then inhale once again. So if that feels comfortable for you, just maybe taking a few seconds to engage in that box breathing practice of an inhale and hold, Exhale. Hold. And a couple more breaths. And when you're ready, letting go of the box breathing practice and finding yourself back in the Zoom room. Lovely. So thank you all for being here, everyone. Just a reminder that our meeting is being recorded. We might go into a breakout room kind of situation at the end if the time allows for it and if persons are interested in going into the breakout room. I just want to remind everyone that entering a breakout room is completely optional. And so if you'd rather not go into a breakout room at the end of or when we get to that point, just let my colleague SJ know. So you can just find her in the chat and just send her a direct message to say that you'd rather not be included in the breakout room, and we'll make sure that you're not in there. You're welcome to hang out here with us in the space and, you know, observe the silence and just feel what you need to feel or ask us questions and stuff like that. And there'll also be opportunities for Q&A at the end. And again, just knowing that you're here, your presence is what is more than welcome. Cameras on or off, more than welcome, and questions are more than welcome, but no one is expecting that you must contribute in any particular way. All right. So I want to make some space for my good friend Geraldine. Geraldine is a bit of a
I'm waiting.
I'm gonna say a bit of a firecracker. That's the word that came to mind. A bit of a firecracker. She energizes me. She energizes me and she engages me in these really wonderful conversations that ask me to rethink the way that I have thought about everything, and in a beautiful, beautiful way. And I love how our conversations just unfold in a way that is just filled with laughter. You know, it's just filled with energy and love. And it really just takes me back to this process of learning and just being really grateful to have people like Geraldine in my life. So Geraldine is an integrative coach and facilitator. She is the owner of GDB Coaching and Consulting. And she's just an all-round fantastic person. And I'm not going to take too much up off the time with trying to tell everyone how fantastic Geraldine is. As we're going to go through this conversation, you're going to learn how fantastic Geraldine is. So I want to put it over to Geraldine to say, we're here to have this conversation about authenticity. And I recall when I invited you into this conversation and I said, Geraldine, you want to be a mindful lunch guest speaker? We're going to talk about filling your boots and finding your authenticity. Geraldine's first question to me, do you remember the question, Geraldine?
No.
Well, your question to me was, how authentic is authenticity anyway? I'm like, hey, so Geraldine, I guess maybe the key thing to start with is like, tell us a little bit about your take on the word authentic, and why you've, in your life experience, you've arrived at that position or that understanding or wisdom about authenticity.
Well, and thank you, Pat Lee, for inviting me here. I'm honored to be here. I love collective, and I love women in group and community. I also want to add that I do facilitate the Strength and Community workshops at the Women's Enterprise Center too. So I get to do that juicy, lovely collective work as well. And so in my work, I've had the privilege of being in group or in community or one-on-one with a variety of women, a variety of ages, and having really meaningful conversations. And what's funny is when you ask me to speak on authenticity, I'm like, I don't know, what do I know about authenticity? But turns out I have a lot of thoughts on authenticity. So thank you for asking me to do that. I think when I think about authenticity, I mean, there's so many things that come up, but for me, it's like realness. When I was at Royal Roads in 2017, going for my coaching certification, we had to talk about how we wanted to show up in the world as coaches and this and that. And everybody was saying authentic. I want to be authentic. And I'm like, what even is that? I don't understand, which brings up the question, if everyone's being authentic, like how authentic are we being? Has authenticness lost its authenticity? And it's not surprising that Merriam-Webster Dictionary named authenticity as the word of the year in 2023. It's like, wow, good timing, Pat Lee, good subject to pick. So, so realness and genuineness is the meaning of authenticity. And of course, we live in a world where we are invited to be, encouraged to be authentic. We're being invited in this world now to be really authentic and to show up in an authentic way. And when it comes, I mean, even in the workplace, we're invited to bring our whole self and be authentic. And, you know, as I started thinking about this, I questioned if that was actually true. Because authenticity can mean a lot to a lot of people. And I think authenticity without boundaries is careless.
Mm.
So think about, I take up a lot of space when I walk in a room. So let me tell you a story. Several years ago, before I became a coach, I was being coached. And I went to a leadership conference at the Banff Center for the Arts, and it was at the Peter Lougheed Center for the Art, Peter Lougheed Center of Leadership at the Banff. Okay. And so it's a week-long thing, all day intensives on building your personal leadership. And my coach asked me, so how do you want to show up, Geraldine? How do you want to be present during this week? Which is a question that no one had ever asked me before. And I really had to give it some serious thought. And that led to a prolonged conversation about how do I want to show up? And she identified for me, she mirrored for me how I can show up in a room. And I can walk in and just walk in there and everyone knows I'm in the room. You may have heard my voice. It's boomy, it's loud, I project well, I have a boisterous laugh. There are countless times in my life when I've been told I'm too loud, I'm too much. I have a very boisterous laugh, whatever all those things are, and they're very innate to me, and it's part of my character makeup. But the interesting thing about, had I walked into a leadership conference and just like pushed all my energy into the room and just like, hi, I'm here, is like, what does that do to other people in the space? So what is my responsibility with my own boundaries of my authenticity when I'm walking into a space, especially of people I don't know? And when you think about law of physics, not that I know a ton about physics, and Sharon, you might even have some insight into this, but when something comes at you like this, your tendency is to recoil. And when you pull in, people's tendency is to lean forward, right? Think about being attracted to someone, a potential dating partner, and that game that you play with your energy, and that if someone comes on too strong, that like, right, the energy is like that. And if someone is, the other person has to pull back. So it's this play of energy. And in my conversation with my coach about how I wanted to show up at a leadership workshop for a week was, I didn't want to be inauthentic. I wanted to show up as a concentrated version of my most authentic self. Be who I was and hold myself closer. And what that did was made easy space for other people to engage with me and not feel like, oh, she's intimidating or she's nuts, whatever the thing is. Pat Lee, were you going to say something? You're muted.
I'm like, I don't know how to work Zoom today. So that raises a really interesting point for me, because I often hear that word, she's intimidating.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that.
And like, it doesn't worry me, but I kind of feel I'm wondering if I should be worried when I hear that, where oftentimes because I am a bit loud. I have a big laugh. I totally understand what it means, though, when you say that you can't push all of that energy into the room. But I wonder if sometimes people assume that there is intimidation because they make assumptions about who I am and where I am and why I am the way that I am before they actually try to engage in a conversation. But I kind of wonder, okay, so there's this side where as individuals, we kind of need to figure out how to show up and to sort of read the room in terms of what is required of us in that moment. But is there a flip side in the sense that as individuals that are receiving and making space for other people to be in the room with us, is there something that we need to pay attention to in terms of acknowledging those authentic presentations as they come to us, right? I'm just wondering if that is if that's meant to be part of the dynamic, that we're not just pushing things in, but we're needing to, as part of that authenticity, accept what we find in the room as well.
Yeah. I could answer that in so many ways, but I think if we're going to be social beings, we have to consider who's in the room. And that was part of that, being a concentrated version of my most authentic self, to allow space for other people. A number of us in the room here have done the holding space certification program or foundation program, and that practice of literally sitting back and holding space for another person, for their authenticity to be present also, right? And someone else's authenticity might be much quieter than mine.
Mm-hmm.
I can overtake, and this has been a life practice to remember to, like, one of my hardest lessons, to remember not to overtake, because for me it's super easy. This, and we're going to leave you with some resources too. This reminds me of one of my favorite TED Talks of all time, The Art of Being Yourself, with Carolyn McHugh. She's a lovely Scottish woman. I think I've watched this TED Talk 1,000 times, and every time I learn something. But I think, like before I said, authenticity without boundaries is careless. When the ego is in balance, right? The importance of the ego in balance, we can be more authentic. And I think authenticity without boundaries kind of becomes something that looks like narcissism. Right? It's like, well, it's just the way I am. It's just who I am. And so, I mean, who's dealt with people who are, well, it's just the way I am. I'm not going to change it. It's this way. Or we're told, don't even bother trying because that's just the way they are. So immediately there's a wall that comes down, and that is an ego imbalance. But so is when we what does she call it? When we don't think enough of ourselves, right? When we're playing too meekly. engaging with other people. That might be authenticity, but how can you deepen your authenticity to then find your confidence?
Mm.
You know, I'm just going to jump around to a whole bunch of ideas because they're just flying through my head. I read, for anyone who's read any Gabor Mate, his latest book, The Myth of Normal. I have not read the whole thing. It's very thick. I go pop in and out, but he talks about attachment versus authenticity. And when we are children, when we're young, when we're dependent on our caregivers, we will sacrifice our authenticity to maintain attachment of security and safety. So think about, for example, I mean, I've done this to my grandchildren too. My granddaughters are boisterous and lively, and it's like, shh, 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 like, oh, we have to be quiet, or use your inside voice. Like all those ways in which we curb children just a little bit to be in a space with us that feels more manageable, or to be in the school space that feels more manageable. And so little by little, we're told as children to tame down our authenticity. Part of that is learning how to be social, sure, but we're clipping back these things. And like I said, I've been told countless times, I'm too loud, I'm too this, I'm too that, I'm too emotional, for sure, and in the workplace. So these are, you learn to like cut these away from yourself. So it's not surprising that as we're adulting, we're going, oh, hey, is this authentically me? Am I being authentically me? Is this belief me? Is this behavior me? Or is this a habit that I've developed? Or is this a conditioning of my family or my ancestors or murmel? We hear that even more as women and girls. Yes, Allison, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So, yeah, authenticity isn't just this, yay, let's be authentic. It's just not that. It's got all kinds of gnarly roots and branches and twigs and meanings to different people. And then cross-culturally, like add that to the mix. And I can't speak to that very well myself, but then there's all kinds of other intricacies about authenticity. So I think it's a journey of exploration.
Yeah.
Really, the authenticity piece.
Yeah, I feel like I want to agree with you that it's a journey of exploration, and it's like quietly and slowly finding out where those points of authentic and inauthentic contact really lie in your human and social relationships.
Mhm.
I'm really I'm really fascinated about two things that you said, that authenticity without boundaries is narcissism. But I think one of the other big things that I really want to touch on before we get into a little bit of a Q&A session and invite the audience members to ask what they're feeling or to say what they're feeling is, especially when we think about this idea of making room for people when it comes to the concept of being authentic and sharing that space for authenticity. How do we do that? Or what would be your take on how do we do that in the workplace space? Like, are we, like, does it even make sense to attempt to try to show up authentically in our workspaces with some of the things that we have to deal with? Or, especially like Allison pointed out, that we hear so much of this as women and girls, that we need to take things down a notch and make space for other people. But when you're an adult and you're trying to hold your own, and there's so much that you have to push back against in terms of those societal norms that are really about keeping us nice and quiet as opposed to letting us be ourselves. Where do we sit with that? So I'm curious, what's your take on that? Is there space for being authentic in the real world, in the world of work where most of us live?
I'm going to say measured. One of the resources you'll get is a really fabulous podcast by Adam Grant. and the whole podcast is about authenticity as a double-edged sword. And they did a really in-depth, he quoted a huge meta-analysis that was done several years ago, and they surveyed people in the workplace. And it turns out when people focused on being their authentic selves at work, like that was their focus, to be their authentic selves at work, they were less successful. They had lower performance reviews, and they received fewer promotions. He went on to talk about, and it's a really, I encourage you all to listen to it. He talked to people who had experiences of being authentic, not being able to be authentic, having to measure themselves in that podcast. But there was one thing about you have to authenticity without actually having a, I'm going to say, proven credibility track record won't serve you well. So it's like, it's a measured approach. So if you're going to say, I'm going to do the work first and lay out for people where I'm capable, how I'm committed, and then hold like my understanding was to hold your authenticity volume to a little lower decibel, and then you can bring that forward as your credibility, rightly or wrongly. But this was something that studies showed, especially they did a huge panel of interviews with lawyers where this played out. So your track record is important. Your credentials, not credentials is the wrong word. Help me out here, but
Credibility.
your credibility is important too, right? Your lived experience, your work experience, all the other things that you bring to the table, in addition to your authenticity. And sometimes it's not welcome, even when it's asked for, authenticity, that is. You probably, and I'll share that story that we talked about in our pre-interview, Pat Lee, that I was in a work situation where there was a team of us, and we were asked repeatedly, week upon week, as a team to, this is where you could bring your fears of what was keeping you awake at night. Want you to bring those to the table so that we could get a better understanding of each other and this, that, and no one was ever doing it. So maybe that was my hot hint right there. No one ever really spoke, oh, this is keeping me awake at night. So one night, or one day, in one meeting, I decided, okay, I'll go. And no surprise, I was the first person to ever do it. And as it turned out, the only person to ever do it. And I said, I'm not asking for any help here. I don't need anyone's input, or I just want to say that I've got this meeting coming up with this particular person tomorrow, and this person has been difficult to work with and a little bit of a bully. And, we're working on this big project together that's really important to the organization, la, la, la. And I said, and it's keeping me awake at night because I do not enjoy interactions with this person. I probably said it a little bit differently, and I might have sterilized it a teeny tiny bit for this audience. So it hung there for a minute. And then the leader of the team said, why are you even worrying about that? It doesn't even matter. Let it go. Why are you even worrying about that? And you would hear a penny drop in the room. And I'm like, okay. It's literally what I said. I put my hands on the table. I went, okay. That was the end of those conversations. But that was an invitation to bring something to the table. And it was it was me being authentic. I wasn't asking to be fixed. I wasn't in floods of tears. I wasn't being helpless. I wasn't being whiny, none of that. and it wasn't welcome. So it's a tricky thing bringing authenticity to the table, because then if that's what you're asking people to do, then you have to create the space to hold it.
Mm,
There has to be a container for it to be held. And it was evident in that case, there was no space for it.
yeah,
That wasn't actually
yeah,
really. So, I mean, how do you know if it, how do you protect? You don't,
yeah,
right? I mean, tuning into your intuition, having a really solid understanding of who you are and what your values are and what your intrinsic authenticity is, like getting friendly and cozy with who you are authentically on the inside is the most important thing. Sharing it out there might have to be measured and opened up in different ways, in different spaces, in different places.
yeah. I love that. And thank you for sharing that story of that experience with us, because I think I could see from the faces in the
Mhm.
audience, like how many people just went, oh, like that's so not the thing that you would expect would happen when you're faced with that kind of situation in terms of
Yeah.
the question, like, okay, total misstep right there in terms of the way that sharing of authenticity was handled or received. I want to give some time for audience questions and Q&A. So what we'll do is we'll skip the breakout room element here, and we'll be more than happy to share those breakout room questions that we had as part of the takeaway package, along with the resources that Geraldine mentioned, those TED Talks, and that bit of discussion about that research about authenticity. But I had a question here in the chat, or a couple of questions coming through in the chat, and I encourage you, if you've got a question for Geraldine, please feel free to like indicate or put it in the chat or come forward. But I have one question already where one person, Christine, is asking about the difference and or overlap between authenticity and honesty. What do you think about that? Difference or an
Yeah.
overlap between being authentic and being honest?
I think that's a very close matching, right? Like we think about being authentic as being direct, being honest, and being blunt, and that's the value. But that can be really harsh too, right? I think it comes down to reading the room. And you know, how do I say this? We have to respect ourselves enough to know when we can be widely honest and when it's not welcome, because it's not always welcome. Even though we think it's welcome or we're told it's welcome. and right? But I think honesty and authenticity, I mean, certainly honesty with yourself is key. And it's hard to do. Sometimes it's really easy to fudge the truth with ourselves. And I think that's where the work is doing the honesty, authenticity piece with ourselves.
Mhm.
Is that helpful? Yeah. Yeah, Allison, I agree. Values and knowing yours and acting in alignment with them is so important. And sometimes you're in a situation, I don't know if any of you have been in a situation like this before. I was at a concert. I ran into an acquaintance who I hadn't seen for a long time. And I wasn't close enough with this person. And I felt like everything I said was a pandering, like it wasn't authentic. Oh yeah, we're great, like life is good, and oh, I hope you're well, and how are so and so, and like I felt like I was swimming in the shallow end of the pool. And I came away from that thinking that's not how I like to engage with people. So I haven't really, I didn't feel in my own container of me, of Geraldine. It was I'm sure, we've all been in those experiences where it's like, where am I in this conversation? It feels inauthentic.
Yeah, I like that. Good point. We have one point here in the chat that in response to that from Sarah, that I feel like a lot of small talk in day-to-day interactions counteracts that experiencing of authenticity, which I think is so valuable. Like that's so true because we spend so much time in that small talk. We use the small talk to mask what we're really and truly feeling and wanting to say. And it never really leads to those deep and meaningful conversations because we don't really, why is that? Don't know. I don't know why, but it doesn't, like, I feel the same way that you feel, Geraldine. Like I'm swimming in the shallow end and I would like for it to go deeper. So what's your take? Do you think, what do you think holds us back?
I'm gonna say age and hormones. I don't know. And Allison made a comment too. That's a hard situation for those of us who don't really do small talk. And I can do small talk. Like if I'm going to an event and I'm part of the hosting committee, or it's a thing where I'm trying to meet an objective for myself, I can do small talk. And then I take it for what it is. Like I don't put a whole lot of like weight into it. But my experience is I tend to go deep and I go fast and I take people with me. And it can sometimes be jarring and unexpected. But that's me. So if we're going to engage, I'm probably going to go fast. And if you don't want to engage that way, then we probably won't be friends. Probably.
And I guess that's why we're not friends.
Right? A little bit like that.
Oh, but so we've got one more point here in the chat, and by all means, once again, just encouraging anyone, if you've got any questions for Geraldine, like feel free to put them in the chat or come on forward and just express that question. But I like this point that Christina's made here, that it's really a matter of trust. At the end of the day, it's easier to be authentic with some people than it is with others. And I'm thinking that kind of comes back to, that simple note of being able to read the room. But I personally feel like even with those persons that you do trust, like you do have to hold a little bit of your authentic self away from them in certain moments in order to make space for them. And let them be what they need to be in that moment. So they need to have that trust in you as well, but to also be willing to share the space when the time comes and recognize that sometimes it's about the small talk and then sometimes it's about the deep and meaningful conversations. But that's my take. What do you think about this idea of trust and authenticity?
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's what I was meaning about measured, right? We do build trust with people over time, and you can reveal more about yourself. And there are times when it's just going to be no dog and pony show. This is what you got. And there are times and places for that too. Who's cried at work?
Well, I cried at work.
You don't have to put up your hand, but right. And how many times I was told, you're too emotional, Geraldine. You're too emotional. And it made, yeah, Christine, and it made other people uncomfortable. And I'm going to say male colleagues and bosses make them uncomfortable. And when I get passionate about something, there's a good possibility I'm going to choke up. And I also talk right through my knotted up throat and my tears, and I am talking about it. And what I realized, again, it's a read the room situation. Sometimes that is really disruptive. And sometimes it's okay to be disruptive, and you have to use your discernment to know when might be a good, right, appropriate time to do that. And also other people, and including us when we're receiving, have to hold space for that. And someone's discomfort with my tears is not my problem. I am being real and honest with you. And if you can't handle my tears, sir, why is that? Why is that? Let's talk about that. Not that you ever talk about that, but I'm not bothered by that. And it took me years to feel that I'm not bothered by that emotional side of myself. I can handle my own emotions. I'm good with them.
Yeah.
But other people aren't. So sometimes I have to measure that, and sometimes I don't.
Mhm.
And sometimes it bites me in the butt, and other times it's like, thank you. Thank you for speaking it.
Mhm.
Am I answering anyone's questions, or am I just going off?
I think you're answering the questions. I think you're answering the questions plenty. And I think like there's lots of nodding of heads, and I'm thinking that there's lots that's resonating with a lot of people here. And I just want to like really briefly touch on that point about having that moment of, you know, crying at work or feeling overly emotional and having somebody tell you that you're emotional, but knowing that what you're doing is completely right for you and what it is that you need in that moment. And I recognize like I have a naming for that. I talk about a lot in my work, vitalizing what is small, which are the things that we've been told to not pay attention to be dismissive of, to ignore, to pretend as if they don't exist. And when we pretend as if those things don't exist, which include large and small emotions, big and tiny emotions, things that upset us, you know, and just put on that nice compliant smile and carry on. And it really it just wears away at you, it chips away until one day you find that you are nothing left than, you know, a shell of yourself. And for me, that's where I kind of like I don't encourage people to cry at work, like, but I've come to, and I liked how you said it, like it's a slow unfolding, like it took you years to get to this point of recognizing that it is okay. And it's going to take other people years to get to that point of recognizing that that's okay. But the funny thing is, when you recognize that it's okay for yourself, you suddenly have more room for seeing that it's okay for other people to do it as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Or to
and I think,
not. Mhm.
or to not, yeah, or to not, absolutely. And I think that that's like a huge part of the teaching and the learning and the unfolding of this weird thing that we call like being real or showing up or being ourselves.
Mhm. And you know, your authentic self behind your desk working on a project is different from the authentic self that you take out for drinks after work, if that's what you're doing, right? It's different than the authentic self with my best friend on a vacation somewhere, or wherever it's the audience, right? So there are different levels of vulnerable authenticity.
Mm, I love that. Joy had her hand up. Joy, did you have a question or a point that you wanted to make?
I just wanted to buttress the point she was making because for me, it was when I moved to Canada about 4 or 5 years ago. So for me, it was like a cultural shock how I couldn't be my authentic self most of the time, and how I literally had to learn a lot of self-regulation.
Oh.
And so this just it's so good to hear this. I mean, I know when to be my authentic self and when maybe to temper it. So I
Mm.
really, really like that.
Mhm. Joy, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you feel you have found your groove with that, or do you still feel like you're clipping your wings or editing yourself to your detriment? Ever?
Well, here and there. Sometimes I
Yeah.
feel like, I mean, always I try to read the room.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I feel like maybe I didn't show myself because I wasn't sure how they were going to take it. maybe I didn't show what I was capable of, or maybe my strengths enough, because I didn't, maybe they would think I was too much,
Mhm.
or this is not my tribe. So and by tribe, I mean my people, like people who would understand what I'm talking about. So maybe I just don't speak, or maybe I don't just show myself. So to that extent, yes. To another extent, I've been able to build my self-confidence enough to know that it's anybody who doesn't get to see my authentic self's loss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This reminds me of, and maybe this is a good place to leave it, a quote from Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed, which I recommend you all read if you haven't already. Untamed. She talks, one of my favorite quotes from her is, your biggest responsibility in your life is to disappoint as many people as it takes so that you don't disappoint yourself. That to me is a brilliant definition of authenticity. And it doesn't mean you have to lay anything down for anyone else. It's in here, baby. It's all in here. And how fun is that? I mean, come on.
That is my working definition of authenticity. Only I use a different word for than disappoint. It's a far more colorful word.
Are you sharing?
I'll leave that for next time. But Joy, I really love that question. And that's really, that's another aspect of this when we start to think about being your authentic self when you are in a space of that cultural navigation and that reintegration into a different cultural space, which I feel like we actually need to make space for that kind of conversation to happen a little bit more. It is at the top of the hour when we do have to bid adieu for mindful lunch. If you want to hang back a little bit, then that's great. That's totally up to you. But we really do need to end the session so the persons can go on to their post-lunch movements and activities. I really want to just say thank you so much to Geraldine for coming on and sharing her wisdom and having this conversation with us. Thank you to everyone that has, been on here, that's asked questions, that shared in the chat. The conversation continues. Like, this isn't the only place where we have these wonderful conversations. We actually have the REU online community where we do carry on the conversations and continue asking questions and sharing resources about topics beyond our mindful lunch. And so SJ has put the information there for our website and the community in the chat. I encourage you to check it out. And then, of course, we'll share some of those resources that Geraldine has mentioned, not some of, all of those resources that Geraldine has mentioned. Untamed is a really good book that she introduced me to, and I've loved it ever since. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. I really appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much to SJ for her help with technical coordination. Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you to everyone for taking the time out. And I hope you feel super nourished for having joined us today with Mindful Lunch.
Thank you, everyone.